Welcome to BSc Part 3 students. Here we are going to learn about the paper number 10, the C Sharp programming. The C Sharp programming is a new programming language where we learn from first year to second year the C language to C++. Now, in this year, we turn to the next programming language, that is C Sharp programming. The C Sharp programming language is useful for web-based applications, Windows applications, and console-based applications. Here, the unit number 1 of this C Sharp programming is Introduction to .NET. So we turn to the first, our point is .NET architecture. Myself, Deepak Patel. Here we introduce about the .NET architecture. Now turn to the exactly what is this .NET architecture. But before that, what is .NET? The .NET is a particularly a new framework for developing console-based, web-based, and Windows-based applications within the Microsoft environment. We know that today we are actually working with the Microsoft environment where many of the applications we are actually using from the Microsoft. The Microsoft is the company that totally based on graphical user interface environment. So students, we actually need to be a .NET framework where the many number of applications we can develop using this .NET framework. Now, for the developing of .NET framework applications, we should know the exactly architecture of .NET. Now, see here the particularly the diagram having the .NET applications and the .NET framework and operating system, which are actually in the chronological order, where the operating system plus hardware at the totally at the bottom level. Now at the upper side, this is the .NET framework where which actually works as an interface between operating system and the .NET application. Now here on the top level, see in the figure, the .NET application is at the outside of this .NET totally framework. Now we turn to the .NET applications, but before that, the .NET network framework gives some of the very important aspects of any of the applications which we actually learns with the console based application, web based application, and Windows based application. Here is a .NET framework architecture. See here at the bottom side there are number of layers. From one to one layer we turn to the we can call it as a Visual Studio .NET. Now at the lower side, where red portion of this figure shows that the common language runtime. What is this? The common language runtime is the basic building block of this .NET framework architecture. This is also called as the heart of this .NET framework. The it shows that the next is a at the upper side there is a base class library. Now framework has one of the class library which takes the many number of built-in functions from this class library which are actually written in the Windows, and this .NET framework takes advantage of all this. The upper part, the upper layer, which shows that the data and XML. Here, the data and XML, which is having the database which is stored at the base level. Here, XML is also stored, and we can develop our application with the use of XML also. Again, on the next upper side, the web services, so that is web based applications we can develop from .NET framework. The another side is an user interface. Now the user interface is a particularly interface which is actually seen by the user, and it will interact with the .NET framework as well as at the back end level. Now one of the second layer which is a common language specification. The common language specification is a language specification where we can work with any number of languages which are actually at the upper side of this pair, where we can say that VB.NET, C Sharp, C++, Perl, and so on. Many number might be the Java language, the uh, COBOL language, as well as new arrived any languages we can adopt to use in the .NET framework. So there we can use the 61 languages. Those all languages are .NET framework architecture, the languages which can be compatible with this .NET framework. Now turn to the next. The .NET architecture has many number of components. So all these components are actually specified here. This framework in which we can run the code. Where we can do it, the framework which we are using in this .NET, that there we can run our actual code. The actual code is our source code. This can be written in C Sharp or VC++ or Java or any of the like VB.NET like languages. Now the .NET architecture has the following components. First component is a very important, that is a common language runtime. So as I have told you earlier, that common language runtime is a basic building block of this totally .NET architecture. The common language runtime is a particularly runtime environment of .NET which is responsible for executing the .NET program, and it also produces the Microsoft Intermediate Language, or it is also called as intermediate language. It converts the source code which is written in any language supported by .NET like C Sharp, VB.NET, J Sharp, or even Visual C++. This all code will be again translated into Microsoft Intermediate Language code. This code is converted to native code by using JIT. So Thus, the .NET is a platform independent. The next is a common language specification. So what is this? This makes the .NET as a language independent. So it contains a set of basic languages features that the .NET language is required to develop applications and services. These are compatible with .NET frameworks. Where there is a situation to communicate objects written in the different .NET compliant language, those objects must expose the features that are common to all the languages. So, the Common Language Specification, that is CLS, ensures complete interoperability among applications regardless of the language used to create the application. The next is the common type system. The common type system is a particularly it defines a common type system, and it is also a set of standard data types which is used by intermediate languages, that is MSIL. Each .NET compliant language should map its data types so that it has some standard data types, and this makes it possible for two languages to communicate with each other by passing some of the receiving parameters to or from each other. For example, CTS defines a type integer 32, which is an integral data type of 32 bits, which is mapped by C# through integer and VB.NET through its integer data type. Like this, common type system which is compatible to many of the languages, the data types. The next is a framework class library. So what is this framework class library? Which provides the huge framework or base class library for commonly usual tasks. The FCL, that is framework class library, contains thousands of classes which provides access to Windows API and common functions, structures, IOs, streams, threads, security, network programming, Windows programming, web programming, data access, etc. So what is the best part of this library is that it follows the extreme efficient object-oriented design pattern, which making their access and very useful and simple to predict. So we can use the classes in FCL in our program just as you would use in any other class. The next is a just-in-time compiler. So just-in-time compiler is uses the particularly the code which is compiled from intermediate language and it can be executed. The CLR invokes this JIT compiler which compiles the IL code to native executable code, and it is designed for the specific machine and OS. JIT in many ways which is different from the traditional compiler, and as they compile the intermediate language code to the native code only when it is desired. So this is called as a JIT compiler. So JIT compiler, where the compilation process and execution process will be done from the source code to the native code. So source code first will be generated some of the language compiler, then it will go towards the MSIL, that is Microsoft Intermediate Language, and it is converted and sent to the JIT compiler. The JIT compiler executes that the source code and it will provided the native code. As we know that Common Language Runtime, which is a CLR, that is a basic building block of .NET architecture, or we can say that it is really a heart of this .NET architecture. It runs all the programs which we are writing in number of languages like VB.NET, like C Sharp, like Visual C++, or Java or JavaScript also. C Sharp compiles it to the Microsoft Intermediate Language, that is MSIL. So what MSIL does it? MSIL runs it on the CLR. Now, the virtual machines like Java, which is also used the base as a common language runtime. So the code written in many languages will be compiled to MSIL, and it is particularly given to the common language runtime, and this will be shown as a component of this .NET architecture. Thank you.